What's your scariest camping experience? I was tent camping in Arkansas around 2003 to 2004, and the Blair Witch Project was still fresh on my mind. I was about 20 years old at the time. Around 2 to 3 in the morning we are woken up by what sounds like a small child running around our tent crying and trying to get in. I was thoroughly freaked out. Finally decided to open the tent, and there was a kid that couldn't have been more than 3 years old, scared half to death, and only wearing a diaper. One had lots of thought going through my head, but mostly how the hell do I handle this? I can't really go campsite to campsite. The ranger office is closed and I'm standing there in the middle of the night holding a child that isn't mine. We had decided to call the cops, figuring it was the safest thing to do. Just then a lady walks down the trail and is like, "How did you get out?" The kid was saying "Mama, Mama," and went straight to her. She nonchalantly said thank you and walked away. Now as a parent, I can't imagine how much more that would freak me out if it were my kid. I was pretty young, went camping with my dad in Alabama. It's late at night, the embers of the fire are dying down, we are about to go to sleep, when we hear what I can only describe as a bone-chilling moan in the woods. We looked at each other and decided it was trees rubbing together, but then it happened 2 more times. My dad grabbed the flashlight, and I walked behind him with a big stick, determined I would save him if something went wrong. Eventually we discover a woman lying on the ground, not far from our campsite. She was on a hill, with her head facing down, feet uphill, continuing to moan. Turns out she had so much to drink that she could hardly talk, but she was also camping out in these woods with her boyfriend. They had a big fight, and he drove away, leaving her alone in the forest. She had seen our fire dying, and wanted to give us the rest of her firewood before she left too, but had tripped and was too drunk to get up. We got her back to her campsite, and made sure she wasn't driving anywhere that night. I too never forget that moaning sound though. I was camping in Zion National Park in late August 1992, the campground was almost empty by then. At 3:30 in the morning I woke up in midair. You know those dreams where that happens? I figured that's what it was, then I hit the ground. Earthquake. Then I was hearing cracking sounds, a few small thuds, then thud. Little bits of the cliff face had sheared off. Thankfully the campground was far enough from there that no one was injured. Had that happened in the daytime, there's a good chance that a number of people would have been killed. The park was closed for a few days after that, and you couldn't get in or out for much of that day, as one entrance road was just gone, and the other one, a boulder the size of a car, had fallen on it. That one they got open that day and they kicked everyone out of the park. Anyhow I called home to say I was okay. Everyone was like, "Why, what happened?" It hadn't made the news or anything. Fortunately it was relatively mild, just some local destruction. I was camping once in the UP in Michigan, in a pretty secluded spot with distinct individual campsites. It was in the fall, so dead leaves were all over the ground. When we were settling into sleep, we started to hear these slow, consistent footsteps on the leaves. They'd walk around the campsite, circle our tent, just walk all around without any clear goal and without stopping. Obviously we assumed it was some kind of animal, but when we rushed out with a light there was nothing, I mean no sound, no trace of anything. Once we were back in the tent, these footsteps immediately started up again, and they didn't come from far away, they started up right next to our tent. We repeated this whole rigmarole probably 3 more times, because of how distinct and close and creepy those footsteps were, and we never caught even a glimpse of what was walking around. The next morning we were sitting by the fire, and started hearing the steps again, only to look down and realize it was the sound of multiple small frogs hopping around the campsite. When I was a kid, probably around 11 to 13, my best friend's grandparents lived on a farm, maybe 100 acres of forest with a few clearings and a house, that we used to camp out in all the time. One night, a few of us were camping and we heard repeated thumps and screaming coming from the trees. We had literally just finished reading a book about Bigfoot in school, and were positive that Bigfoot was out in the woods hitting trees and roaring. We got out of the tent, terrified, and walked through the woods towards the noise. Note: I guess people really do this kind of dumb thing, it's not just in horror movies. We eventually came to a clearing and found several of my friend's uncles trying to fix an old barn. While they were absolutely shit-faced, At like 2 o'clock in the morning. The thumps were the sound of them hitting wood with hammers. The screams were when they missed and hit themselves, because of the alcohol. We were terrified, but now it's hilarious. 10 years ago I went camping for a weekend. Went out hiking the morning of the second day, and pretty soon found ourselves off trail, on a pretty steep incline along the Monashi River. We were about 100 feet up the incline. Suddenly one of my friends lost his footing and started to slide. On the way down he took out my other friend, and I watched them hit every rock and tree on the way down to the rapids. One climbed down to find my one friend dead on the side of the river, and the other taken away by the river. His body was found 2 weeks later 2 kilometers from where they fell in. His body, or whatever is left of it, is still in the river because when search and rescue tried to remove it from the log jam it was stuck in, the boulders on the riverbank came loose and collapsed on top of his corpse. This was a very abbreviated version of the story, but overall a very scary day. Late at night camping in the desert, heard footsteps all around our tents. Thought it was maybe some drunk guy from one of the nearby camps, who was riding dirt bikes and stuff all day. Couldn't see anyone. Couldn't see any shadows. Kept hearing the footsteps, literally inches from our tent. Woke up my friend silently and made him listen too, we were freaking out. Finally they went away, so I slowly opened my tent zipper to look around and see who or what it was. Threw out a glow stick, and saw some eyes flash in the darkness. Turns out it was 2 white desert foxes, whose footsteps were somehow extremely heavy sounding. When I saw them they were on our camp table, eating all of our chocolate. Oops. Leech on my eyeball at age 10 still my go-to camping story. Fell asleep in the car, which was carrying some firewood on the roof rack. Woke up with a puffy eye that both mum and dad were frustratingly. "You'll be fine," about without even looking, unlike the usual best parents vibe. We were playing cards and my mum let out this piercing scream and turned away from me. Family friend flicked off the big juiced up leech, which had crawled out of my eye and was heading for my nose. I watched the leech burn in the fire while my eyeball bled for a noteworthy 14 tissues. Pretty sure 2 guys were going to rape my friend and me. We were teenagers, 16 and 18, and went up alone. We made dinner, and were having a good time in the evening when some guy passed by our site in the river. He had a fishing pole, so we were like whatever. He asked to go through our site to the road, and we figured it was harmless enough and said yeah. He stopped and looked around our site, and started asking us questions. How old are you? Where are you from? How long are you staying? Typical questions that were none of his business, but we were naive enough to answer. He eventually leaves and heads down the canyon on the road. A couple hours later, he shows back up with a buddy. Both of these guys are middle-aged, probably mid-40s. They start asking more questions. The original guy walks around and snoops about our campsite. We got an uneasy feeling and were super grateful when they eventually left. But they went up the canyon, rather than back where they came from. Another couple hours pass and it's dark. My friend mentions how she can't hear anything because of the river, and it had her a bit antsy. We talked and it turned out we had both been on edge since the guys left. We had never seen them go back down the canyon. We both had a gut feeling that we needed to leave and fast. Maybe nothing would have happened, but we both felt it. They guys asked all the right questions to know that we would be there alone and defenseless that night. In college I did a lot of solo car camping from the back of my truck I owned at the time. I went to a remote public area in the Ozarks and planned to stay overnight. After setting up all my bedding and having dinner, and a sugary dessert, I decided to hunker down for the night. Well, about 45 minutes after turning off the light I start hearing leaves crunching in the woods about 30 yards away. Not really concerned, I write it off as an opossum, deer, coyote, etc. just moving through the area. However, my imagination started going wild, as it always does, and I start thinking of the worst situations. More leaves crunching, but closer. Definitely in the campsite. I usually carry a can of bear spray, but being a dumb kid I didn't think about the fact that I was in an enclosed space until I was ready to use it. More crunching leaves, but further away. I start to relax a little as eventually they disappear. Nerves completely racked, I try to go to sleep. I think at some point I get into a really light sleep and wake up about 2 to 3 hours later. It's about 2 in the morning and there is very obviously something walking between me and the campfire. At this point a deep, loud, and incredibly scary voice from inside my truck camper asks, "Do you believe in God?" One fucking start screaming and turn on headlamps, thrashing, and get ready to defend for my life. The footsteps run away and disappear into the woods as I am in full panic mode. I have to tell myself I hallucinated the whole thing because of the sugary dessert I ate before bed. Still gets my heart racing when I think about it too much to this day. Just 2 weeks ago, I was eating dinner with a buddy on a mountainside in Denola National Park. We heard a sound of rocks tumbling down coming from the steep hillside above us, and my first thought was, oh shit, landslide. I turned to look and about 10 feet away 5 caribou, 2 babies, were sprinting down the hillside next to us. I heard more rocks and close behind them, about 20 feet from me, a wolf was chasing them down the mountain. When it saw us, the wolf stopped next to us and stared for a second and then ran back up the hill to a little outcropping of rock about 60 feet away. It stood there and stared at us for a good half of a minute, took a few steps towards us, then ran away. We knew there was a wolf den in the area, but wolf encounters are in DNP, and I never would have wished to see one so close. I wasn't really afraid for my life since there were 2 of us and only one of him, but it was a very wild experience and my legs were definitely shaking. Oh, you've come to the right place. About 20 years ago in Pisgah National Forest, I was camping in a hammock for the first time. I didn't have a rain top yet, leaving myself completely uncovered save for a sleeping bag. Now this was a trip from a summer camp in the area, so there were about 6 other teens with me. One kid decided, hey, chocolate, that's not a smellable, right, and left the chocolate in his pack, right next to mine, under the hammock. You may see where this is going. Lo and behold, around 12 o'clock, a juvenile black bear mossies his way on into our campsite looking for that sweet, sweet chocolate. As he was messing with the packs underneath the hammock, his back kept bumping into me. I was starting to wake up, but I was very groggy. I kinda thought it was the kid looking for something in his pack. The bear realizes that the hammock is moving, and gives it a bat with his paw. Like a cat with yarn. Swinging me. At this point I realize this is not a camper, and start screaming. The rest of the campsite woke up, and we threw rocks at the bear until it ran away. The kid got a severe punishment. Edit, spelling. I was an Air Force cadet for most of my youth. From 13. When I was about 16 I was a cadet sergeant, and was put in control of about 10 guys, lower ranks than me on a navigation exercise. This was quite a while ago, before OHS really came about. We used to do wild stuff and it was great. But I was the only female on this particular time, and when I led the guys to our checkpoint, we were instructed to camp for the night, and continue to the next checkpoint in the morning. So we made camp, a fire, and just hung out eating our rations. There was this weird guy, maybe 14, but physically massive, who always rubbed me up the wrong way. It was really dark and quiet. And he just goes, "Hey, have a good idea. Let's rape Sergeant Cameron." My blood went cold. And I looked over my other cadets. They all laughed it off. Shut the dude down. One said, "What? She's just a cool guy with long hair." They tried to make it casual, but I knew they were actually aware and trying to protect me. Before this he had bragged about knowing how to break a person's neck and wanting to kill animals. I didn't sleep that night. Just sat up by the fire and reported him when we got back to base the next day. If I didn't have good mates with me that night who respected me, I don't know what would have happened. Last summer I was camping in the San Juans in SW, Colorado. We go almost every year, but the weather last year was like I'd never seen before. It's always monsoon season when we go camping, but this time it started raining and just didn't stop. For 5 days we camped in constant rain with landslides coming down all around us. Every day, we were completely blocked from leaving camp in some new different direction, with the route to the closest town blocked, making it several hours away. A bad avalanche winter cleared swaths of trees, and wildfires had cleared out our normal camping areas and even more trees, which left nothing but bare ground to be washed away by the rains. Our last day of camping, as we were packing up, we hear the increasingly familiar sound of a landslide starting, followed by the most terrifying blood-curdling scream I have ever heard in my life. I have no doubt I heard someone die that morning from across the valley, so we hauled us down the mountain and found someone with an ATV and radio to try to get help. We headed out towards home east on 170 afterwards, and ended up missing the Glenwood Canyon landslide by about 45 minutes, which was so powerful it changed the course of the Colorado River and completely washed away the highway. Mother Nature taught me a lot about respecting her power that trip. I was once solo camping for the first time in Harz, Germany. It was my first time going alone, and I was very new to this. When I arrived in Wernigerode, I started walking, but the path on my map didn't exist, so I went back. It was already dark when I returned to the village, so I decided to sleep in the hills close to the village. After I set up camp, I wanted to sleep, but I heard noises. It almost sounded like a baby crying and screaming in short bursts. I really got paranoid over a 15-minute time, slowly hearing the sounds coming closer. After a while, the sound was so close that I decided, fuck this, put on my clothes, went out of the tent and dragged it to the road. Packed everything and went into the village again, and slept in the local park. Unfortunately, there were no places hidden from the path, so I chose to sleep as far away from the path in only my green sleeping bag. Next day I woke up early and got back. So now with more experience, it was probably some bird, and my paranoia made it worse than it was. It had just stopped raining and dinner was on the go. We had to stoke the fire back up and quickly, so everyone went to work gathering wood from the forest. Twigs, branches, kindling. The fire was going nicely, tall flames. Now to keep adding to it so we could get those coals to boil the water and cook the food. I was in a plastic poncho, and turned to tidy to woodpile by the fire, when there came a loud shout. "Look out!" I turned around, startled, and saw nothing out of the ordinary, then heard running footsteps from the side, and before I could turn to look, I got tackled. The poncho got ripped off, up my back and over my head, and as I hit the ground, I caught a fleeting glimpse of a fireball sailing through the air, then landing on the pine needles of the ground ahead. The others ran to it and stomped it out, as the camper who tackled me stood and helped me to my feet. My back had been to the fire, and as I was bending over to tidy the woodpile, the bottom edge of the poncho had caught fire and flames shot up my back. I didn't even feel it, or know it, but my dad's friend Ted just happened to glance up that moment and see my back go up in flames, and he didn't hesitate, just ran and jumped and tore it off. Split seconds before it would have melted into my back. Saved my life. Thank you so much for watching all the way to the end. Please like and subscribe for more videos like this one.